My name is Rachel Moore. I'm 32 years old, and if you asked anyone in my family to describe me, they'd probably hesitate like they're reaching for a word they haven't used in a long time. She's quiet, they might say. Or she's doing something with writing, I think. Maybe even she's the one who moved to Denver, right? But what they really mean is, she's the one we don't talk about much. This story begins the day I received the wedding invitation I wasn't supposed to get. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table, eating reheated soup and refreshing my inbox while watching the snow slip down the glass in slow spirals. Winter in Denver is like that, soft, silent, and sometimes lonely. It was a rare, quiet day. No client calls, no deadlines breathing down my neck. Just the kind of day where old memories sneak in if you're not careful. Then the email came. Subject: You're invited, Melanie, Chase's big day. At first I laughed, literally out loud, because surely this was a mistake. Melanie is my younger sister, the family favorite, the golden child with the white teeth, the Pinterest perfect life, and the ability to turn every family gathering into a one-woman show. And Chase? I had only met him once, years ago. A handshake, a stiff smile, and his eyes scanning the room behind me, probably for Melanie. I clicked the RSVP link mostly out of curiosity, but the page was real. Venue details, registry links, a custom hashtag. Chasing Mel forever. Of course. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stared at the blinking cursor and thought about the last time I saw my family. It was at our father's retirement party 2 years ago in Boston. I wasn't even included in the photo slideshow. Every other cousin, every grandchild, even a blurry dog from a summer camping trip made the cut, but not me. Later, when I pointed it out carefully, softly my mother waved it off like lint on her blouse. Oh, Rachel, don't be so sensitive. It was just an oversight. You know how those things go. Yes, I knew. Oversights were kind of their specialty. But the wedding invite? That was new. A shiny, perfectly crafted email complete with a link to a bridesmaid dress fitting I'd never been told about. Like someone had suddenly remembered I existed and decided I should sit quietly in the background this time. Maybe I should have ignored it. Maybe I should have closed my laptop and gone back to my day. But instead, I clicked yes. And just like that, I stepped back into a world I'd worked so hard to leave. The wedding was scheduled for mid-May, a vineyard estate in upstate New York, elegant, rustic, and utterly unforgettable, the website promised. And just like that, my mind began to spiral. What would I wear? Who would I sit next to? Would anyone even talk to me? Or would it be like all the other family events, me floating through like a ghost, smiling too much and drinking just enough to blur the edges? I booked a flight to Albany, then a rental car. I emailed the bride-to-be-own sister a polite note confirming my attendance. No reply, not even a thumbs-up emoji. 2 weeks later, a formal paper invitation arrived in the mail. My name was misspelled. Rachel. With an A. I stared at it for a long time. Not angry. Just tired. Tired of always being an afterthought. A typo. The night before the flight, I sat on my bed packing and caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look like the girl they used to know. My hair was longer now. I wore glasses. My face had lines I earned from too many late nights and freelance stress. But behind all that, the same eyes stared back wounds that had once begged to be seen. I pressed my hand to the mirror and whispered, "You don't owe them anything." But I knew, deep down, I still wanted something. Not their love, not even their approval. Just acknowledgement. That I was there. That I had been there. All those years. Watching. Hurting. Hoping. When I landed in Albany, the sky was gray, heavy with spring rain. The drive to the vineyard took about an hour and a half. Rolling hills, cracked asphalt, and 1,000 memories I had stuffed into mental boxes over the years. I arrived just in time for the rehearsal dinner. It was being held on the covered patio behind the main lodge. String lights twinkled above, white linen napkins, soft music, a bar with floral cocktails and signature drinks. I stood at the edge for a moment, clutching my coat, scanning for a familiar face. "Rachel," someone called. I turned. It was my Aunt Lisa. She looked exactly the same sharp bob haircut, pearls, and that signature pity smile she reserved just for me. "Oh my God, I didn't know you were coming," she said, leaning in for an air kiss. "Melanie didn't mention you were on the list." "Of course she didn't." "Yeah," I said lightly. "Last-minute change." She laughed like it was a joke, then, already distracted, she gestured behind me. "Have you seen your mother yet?" I hadn't, but I was about to. Because just then, my mom appeared from behind a decorative curtain of vines, holding a clipboard and looking flustered. Her eyes skimmed the room until they landed on me. She blinked. "Rachel?" she said, like I'd shown up uninvited to someone else's home. "I'm here for the wedding," I offered with a half smile, trying to keep it light. "Oh, right, yes, well, good. That's great." She turned back to the clipboard. That was the welcome. I spent the next 2 hours in awkward conversations and ghostly half-hugs. Nobody asked about my life. Nobody asked about Denver or my work or whether I was seeing anyone, but they sure gushed about Melanie. Her doctor fiancé. Her perfect skin. Her new house in Connecticut with the marble kitchen. "She's just got it all, doesn't she?" one cousin said, sipping a sparkling peach spritzer. "Your mom must be so proud." I nodded politely, the way I always did. But something inside me flickered, a small, sharp spark. Because suddenly, it felt like I was waking up in the middle of a dream I didn't know I'd been having. Or a nightmare. One where I'd been asleep for years, just going through the motions, accepting the scraps, blaming myself for being unlovable. And now? Now I was beginning to see it. All of it. Later that night, I found my seat at the long dinner table. I was wedged between two distant relatives I hadn't spoken to since middle school. My name card was handwritten, everyone else's had been printed in gold foil. Across the table, I caught Melanie's eye. She looked stunning, of course, hair in a sleek bun, skin glowing, her laugh dancing through the room like a melody. She didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't even acknowledge me. It was as if I were a server, or a worse part of the scenery. And just like that, I realized I wasn't just the forgotten sister. I was the invisible one. But not for much longer. Because something inside me had cracked open. And this time, I wasn't going to patch it back together. Not for them. Not ever again. I didn't sleep much that night. The guest lodge where they'd put me clearly an overflow room was cold and drafty, tucked farthest from the main building with a view of the parking lot instead of the vineyard. I lay there under the stiff hotel sheets, staring at the wooden beams in the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of laughter drifting from the bridal suite. They were probably doing a champagne toast, or sharing matching robes, or laughing about some childhood memory I wasn't part of. That's the thing about families like mine. They rewrite history together. The parts that hurt, the parts that don't make them look good, they just quietly erase them. And I've spent years wondering if I imagined everything. If I was just too sensitive, too dramatic, too me. But that night, lying in that room, the fog started to lift. And the truth was standing there, plain as day. The next morning was the wedding day. The sky was cloudless, the vineyard sparkled. Rows of white chairs stretched toward a floral archway. Staff bustled around in black polos, setting tables, adjusting place cards. I showed up to the main house around 10, carrying my dress bag. No one had told me the exact timeline, so I assumed it was like most weddings share and makeup early, then hours of waiting. But when I entered the bridal suite, the room fell quiet. 7 women turned to look at me bridesmaids, cousins, old friends, all in matching silk robes. Melanie was in the center, getting mascara applied. "Oh," she said flatly, "you came." I blinked. "Yeah, you invited me." She glanced around, then back at me. "Well, we're kind of full in here." I felt my throat tighten. "I can wait outside." Her makeup artist shrugged, already turning back to her work. "That's probably best. We're on a tight schedule." I left without saying another word. I sat outside on a stone bench for over 2 hours. My dress still in its bag. My phone battery slowly draining as I refreshed nothing in particular. Nobody came to get me. Nobody offered a timeline. Nobody even texted. At one point, I caught a glimpse of my mother through the window. She was laughing, toasting with a mimosa, surrounded by Melanie's future in-laws. I remember thinking, she's never looked that happy with me. And it wasn't a dramatic thought, just a fact. When I finally got changed in a side restroom, I did my own hair in the mirror under a flickering bulb. My makeup was minimal mascara, a little blush, lip gloss. I stared at myself afterward and tried to imagine how they saw me. Probably like some distant cousin who'd shown up out of obligation. Or worse, someone who used to be part of the family and just hadn't gotten the memo that she wasn't anymore. At the ceremony, I was seated in the second to last row. I wasn't a bridesmaid. I wasn't even part of the procession. They gave me a program with my name misspelled again, this time as Rochelle. I nearly laughed. The ceremony was beautiful, of course. Melanie floated down the aisle like a princess. Chase cried. Everyone awed. And as they said their vows, I found myself scanning the crowd, looking for someone I knew who might be watching me, wondering why I looked so out of place. But no one was. I was invisible again. A ghost at the dinner table. The reception that followed was held inside a glass-walled barn strung with Edison lights and chandeliers. The music was loud, the drinks flowed freely. Everyone seemed caught up in the euphoria of the event. Except me. I found my table 14, all the way in the back end, sat down next to a teenage cousin who spent the entire night on TikTok. Nobody came to ask me to dance. Nobody asked how I'd been. But what really got me cracked something wide open inside my chest was the slideshow. They'd set it up on a screen near the dance floor, a loop of old family photos. Melanie as a baby. Melanie at Disney World. Melanie at prom. Melanie and my parents on vacation. Melanie and Chase skiing. Melanie at her med school graduation. Not a single photo of me. Not one. I remember excusing myself and walking outside into the cool night air. The grass was damp. My heels sank into the ground as I found a spot behind the catering tent, where the music was just a low thump in the background. And I cried. Not a loud sob, not even a tearful breakdown, just quiet, steady tears like a leak that had finally broken through after years of pressure. And it wasn't just about the wedding. It was every birthday I was forgotten. Every Christmas where I got a gift card while Melanie got diamond earrings. Every time I tried to tell my mom how I felt and she said, "Let's not make this about you right now." Every gaslight, every dismissal, every time they made me feel crazy for remembering what they worked so hard to pretend never happened. I cried for the little girl who used to write poems on her bedroom wall just so someone would read her words. I cried for the teenager who used to babysit Melanie while my parents went out to dinner and came back raving about how she was the responsible one. I cried for the 25-year-old who called to tell them she got published in a literary journal, only to hear, "That's nice, honey. Did you hear Melanie's applying for residency at Yale?" That night, I made a decision. No big confrontation. No screaming match or dramatic walkout. But a shift. Something quiet. But final. I wasn't going to keep chasing scraps. Not anymore. After the reception, while guests were still laughing and clinking glasses, I went back to the Vineyard Lodge and opened my laptop. I opened a blank Word document and wrote, "You don't owe them the version of yourself that makes them comfortable." I stared at it for a long time. Then I kept writing. My memories. My side of the story. The things I'd never said out loud. I wrote until my fingers ached. And I knew, deep down, this was just the beginning. I flew back to Denver the morning after the wedding. No goodbyes. No group hug. No. "We're so glad you came." I left before sunrise, dragging my suitcase down the gravel path while the mist still clung to the vineyard vines. The lodge clerk barely looked up when I dropped my key on the desk. It felt fitting disappearing the same way I'd arrived. Quiet, unnoticed. But something had changed. It wasn't just the wedding, it was the realization that the wedding was never about me and it never had been. It was about playing a role in a play I didn't audition for. A role I was cast in before I even knew how to speak. The background sister, the one who doesn't make waves. But I was done playing that part. Back home, I barely unpacked. My suitcase sat at the edge of my bedroom like a corpse I didn't want to deal with yet. Instead, I buried myself in my writing. I don't know how else to describe it except to say it felt like something had cracked open inside me. The more I wrote, the more I remembered, and not just the moments I thought I'd forgotten, but the ones I had been told never happened. Like that time when I was 8 and I won the school spelling bee. I remember running home, clutching my little certificate like it was a trophy. Melanie was 6, she had a cold and a slight fever. When I burst through the door and showed my mom the certificate, she barely glanced at it. "Oh, honey, that's nice. Can you help me find the thermometer?" Later that night, she posted about Melanie on Facebook. "Poor little baby's not feeling well, sending soup and snuggles." Nothing about me. Not a word. It was one of the first times I learned that achievement didn't matter if it didn't come from the right child. I remembered my 16th birthday. They forgot. Literally, no cake, no dinner, no card. My mom said it slipped her mind. My dad said he thought it was next week. But they threw a surprise party for Melanie's 13th 2 months later with balloons, a DJ, and a backyard photo booth. My name wasn't even mentioned. I remembered the first time I tried to confront them. It was Thanksgiving. I was 24. Everyone was gathered at the table, laughing and clinking glasses, and don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe I just finally broke. I said, "Do you guys realize you treat Melanie like she's the only one that matters?" The silence was instant, like I'd flipped a switch. My mom said, "Rachel, this is not the time." My dad shook his head. "You always think the worst of us." Melanie actually laughed and said, "Oh my God, are you really doing this right now?" I left early that night. Nobody called to check on me. I typed it all up, all of it, night after night, memory after memory. I began organizing them into chapters, not in any formal way, but enough to see a shape forming. This wasn't just venting anymore. This was a memoir. A reckoning. A reclamation. One Saturday afternoon, about 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a call from my cousin Jenny. She was one of the only people in my family who ever saw me. We weren't close, exactly, but there were moments. At family events, she was the one who whispered to me when things got weird. The one who once said, "You're not crazy, you know. They really do treat you like you're invisible." So when she called, I answered. "Hey," she said, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, just writing," I said. A pause. Then, "I wanted to talk to you about the slideshow." "I didn't say anything," Jenny continued. "I helped put it together. Melanie asked me to find photos for the wedding. She told me not to include anything with you in it." I froze. She said it would mess up the aesthetic, said she didn't want any drama, that you had a vibe she didn't want in the final cut. I swallowed hard. "She said that to you?" I whispered. Jenny's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, Rachel, I should have said something sooner. I feel sick about it." I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised. I just felt confirmed. Like someone had handed me proof of something I had felt for years but had been too scared to believe. That night, I dug out an old shoebox from my closet. Inside were a few faded photos from my childhood, me at a school recital, me holding a puppy, me and Melanie when we were little and still playing nice. I spread them out across the floor, and I thought, these are the photos that didn't make it. These were the moments that were too off-brand for the family narrative, too real, too me. And I made a decision. I was going to tell the story. All of it. Not for revenge, not for validation, but because I was tired of being edited out. 2 weeks later, I sent a chapter draft to an editor friend of mine. She called me within the hour. "Rachel," she said, her voice breathless, "this is powerful. It's raw and honest and beautiful. You're saying what so many women feel but don't have the words for." And for the first time in my life, I didn't second-guess the compliment. I said, "Thank you," and meant it. I titled the project The Missing Sister, because that's who I had been, to them, to myself. But not anymore. Now, I was the author. Of my story. Of my healing. Of my future. You ever question your own memory? Not the little stuff, like where you left your keys or whether you turned the oven off. I mean the big stuff, The stuff that shaped you. The things that made you who you are. Because that's what I was doing. Every night. Not out of insecurity anymore, but out of clarity. See, once you start digging into your past with honest eyes, you realize how many of your memories weren't just ignored, they were rewritten. Not by accident, but carefully, subtly, strategically. I call it emotional revisionism. My family are masters of it. They don't just deny your experiences, they replace them with new ones. And they do it so convincingly that for years, I actually believed I was the one with the faulty memory. Like the time I got into that screaming match with my dad in high school. I was 17. He had jokingly told me my writing would never pay the bills, and I had finally snapped. I remember yelling, "You never support anything I do unless it looks good on a Christmas card." And he yelled back, "Maybe if you stopped writing about your feelings all the time, we'd have something to be proud of." I ran out the back door, sobbing, spent the night at my friend Lauren's house. She held my hand while I cried on the bathroom floor. But years later, when I brought it up to my mom, she just blinked and said, "That never happened, sweetie. Your father has always been your biggest cheerleader." I laughed, bitterly. "Are you serious?" She looked offended. "You must be remembering wrong." Or there was Melanie's 16th birthday party, the one where I worked for hours helping decorate the backyard, blew up over 100 balloons until my fingers hurt. My mom forgot to get me dinner, so I ate leftover cupcakes in the garage. Later, when Melanie opened her gifts in front of the crowd, she squealed about a charm bracelet. My mom said, "It's from us." But I had bought it. With my own money, I had skipped lunch for a week to afford it. I told her that later, quietly, privately. She rolled her eyes. "You really need to stop keeping score." I started writing these stories down every gaslight, every twist of the truth, every time I was told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too negative. But the more I wrote, the more I realized that these weren't isolated incidents. They were the system. It was how they kept the story straight. Their story. And in their version, I was always the problem. The difficult one. The distant one. The disappointment. I sent another 3 chapters to my editor friend, Emma. She called that night. "This isn't just good," she said. "It's necessary. You're speaking to every woman who's ever questioned whether her pain was real." Then she paused and said something I'll never forget. "You're not just writing about them, Rachel. You're writing for all of us." And I cried. Not from sadness. From release. I hadn't talked to my parents since the wedding. No one called to follow up. No thank you text. No, "Hope you got home safe." Nothing. Until one afternoon, nearly 2 months later, I got a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was sharp, controlled. "Hi, Rachel. I heard from Jenny that you've been writing something, and that you've shared it with people. I don't know what you think happened in this family, but I would really appreciate it if you didn't air our dirty laundry in public. That's not fair to the rest of us." That's not fair to the rest of us. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Can we talk about it?" Not even, "I'm sorry if you were hurt." Just, "Don't make us look bad." I didn't respond. Because that message said more than any conversation ever could. A few days later, Melanie reached out. Via Instagram DM, of course. "Hey, just heard you're writing some kind of book. Just want to say, if this is about attention, there are better ways to get it than dragging your family through the mud. Thought you were better than that." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed one line in response. "I'm not dragging anyone. I'm finally telling the truth." She didn't reply. Around that time, something incredible happened. Emma passed my chapters to her agent friend. He loved them. Within a month, I had a book deal. A real published book deal. They wanted a full manuscript by the end of the year, and not just the pain, but the transformation, the healing, the rise. Because it wasn't just about what they did to Met, was about what I did next. And I knew exactly where to start. I pulled out my old journals, the ones I had hidden under my bed for years, full of half-sentences and poems and unsent letters. I found one entry from college dated April 12, 2012. I feel like I'm on the outside of a glass room. Everyone's inside, laughing, eating, hugging, and I'm just tapping on the glass, begging them to see me. But they don't, or they won't. And some days I wonder if I'm even real. That girl? She deserved better. She deserved to be seen. So I built a book around her voice, chapter by chapter, and it became the most honest thing I've ever created. The more I wrote, the more I remembered myself. Not their version. Mine. The version that loved fiercely. That showed up even when no one else did. That learned to stand in rooms where she wasn't wanted and still keep her chin up. The version that didn't need permission to be real, or valid, or enough. A few months later, I got another call from Jenny. She had read one of the draft chapters and I had let her preview. I cried the whole way through, she said. I thought I was the only one. You're not, I said. You never were. That's the thing about the truth. Once you let it out, it echoes. Other women start whispering it too. Then they say it louder. Then it becomes a chorus. And before long, the people who told you to keep quiet can't drown it out anymore. The book wasn't even out yet and they were squirming. It started with subtle messages from family members I hadn't heard from in years. My Aunt Diane sent a Facebook message that said, "Hey, sweetie, just saw a post about your writing, so exciting. Can't wait to read it. Hope it's not too personal though. Families are tricky, huh?" My old babysitter Cheryl commented under a vague inspirational quote I posted, "Whatever happened to keeping things in the family?" Even Melanie's college friend, someone I hadn't spoken to since 2010, reached out just to say, "Saw your name on a blog talking about that memoir thing. Wow. Bold move." They weren't congratulating me. They were warning me. The polite kind of warning, the kind that sounds like support but tastes like threat. Are you sure you want to do this? Is this really necessary? Don't you think you're being a little unfair? But for the first time in my life, I wasn't questioning myself. I was questioning them. It's funny how the same people who ignored you for years suddenly want to talk the moment you start talking. I hadn't heard from my father in almost 8 months. Not since that cold, clipped hug after Melanie's wedding ceremony. Then one day, I got a letter. Not an email. A letter. Handwritten. Folded neatly. Smelled faintly of cigars and cologne. "Rachel, I hear you've been writing something. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but I just hope you remember that every story has 2 sides. Your mother and I always did the best we could. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it came from a place of love. Family is complicated, but you shouldn't make us out to be villains. That's not fair, and it's not true. Please think about what you're doing. Dad." That line, "we always did the best we could," used to shut me down. Used to make me backpedal, apologize, doubt my memory. But now I saw it for what it was. An excuse. A way to blur the line between unintentional and unacceptable. So I folded the letter, slipped it into the back of my notebook, and didn't reply. Because I wasn't writing for him. I was writing for the girl he forgot. That same week, my publisher reached out with some exciting news. They wanted to feature an excerpt of the book in a national women's magazine. I remember staring at the email, blinking, heart pounding. The headline draft read, "The Sister They Forgot, One Woman's Journey from Family Ghost to Empowered Survivor." It hit me like a wave. I wasn't just Rachel, the overlooked daughter, anymore. I was Rachel Moore, author of a forthcoming memoir. A voice. A witness. A woman reclaiming her story. And I knew deep down that this was the part of the story where the power starts shifting. Not through revenge. Not through screaming matches or dramatic scenes. But through truth. Through clarity. Through presence. It was around that time that I got an email from my cousin Taylor. He had always been quiet, kept to himself, an oddball in his own way. The subject line read, "Thank you." Inside, he wrote, "I've been reading your excerpts." I cried. I thought I was crazy all these years, thought I imagined the way the family treated people who didn't fit the mold. "Thank you for telling the truth. I see you. I believe you. And you're not alone." I sat with that message for hours. Because that's what this was about. Not revenge. Not airing dirty laundry. But connection. Liberation. Naming what was once unnameable so others could finally breathe. A few nights later, Melanie called. Yes, called. Not a DM. Not a passive-aggressive comment. An actual phone call. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me said, "Answer. You're ready." So I did. "Hello?" Silence. Then, "It's me." Her voice was flat, not cold, but not warm either. I said nothing. She finally spoke again. I read it. I knew exactly what she meant. She'd found a leaked early review online, an excerpt from Chapter 6, The Birthday Party That Wasn't Mine. The one where I talked about how she got the cake, the attention, the Instagram post, and I got the plastic plate duty and a reminder to stay out of the pictures. "I never knew you felt like that," she said. Her voice was softer now. "I thought you were just distant, moody. I didn't realize we made you feel so small." I could have said 1,000 things. Like how it wasn't just a feeling, it was a pattern. Or how she never once defended me when I was being iced out of family conversations. Or how she let our mom take credit for my gift and didn't say a word. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I asked, "Why didn't you?" Another silence. "I don't know," she said eventually. "I guess I just didn't want to look too close." That, I believed. She wasn't a monster. She was just comfortable in a system that rewarded her. And when you benefit from something, it's easy to pretend it's not broken. I told her I forgave her. Not because she deserved it yet, but because I needed it. Because carrying around her guilt, her silence, her entitlement, that was a weight I was done holding. Forgiveness wasn't a door I left open for her. It was a door I walked through alone. And on the other side was freedom. She didn't say sorry. Not really. But she did say something I didn't expect. "I hope your book helps people." I said, "It already has." And we hung up. Weeks passed. The manuscript was finalized. The release date set. And slowly, quietly, I began living differently. More boldly. More grounded. I wasn't waiting for their validation anymore. Wasn't checking their socials to see if they'd noticed. Wasn't obsessing over how they'd spin it. I was just existing. Fully. Finally. But I knew something was coming. Because people like my mother, people who live behind polished facades, don't like losing control of the narrative. And when they realize you're not coming back quietly, they start scrambling. They didn't come for me right away. Not with rage. Not with lawsuits. Not even with angry emails. Nomi family is far more calculated than that. First came the nice version. The olive branch soaked in poison. The carefully orchestrated concern. 2 weeks before my book launch, my mother sent a group email. To me, Melanie, my father, a few aunts and cousins. Subject line, "Let's talk family is forever 5. I stared at the screen, my stomach already tightening. Then I read, "Dear everyone, I know things have been tense lately, and I think we're all a little overwhelmed. Rachel's upcoming book has stirred some difficult feelings, and I want to believe it's coming from a place of healing. But I also think it's important we remember that family should be a safe space, not a battlefield. We all have memories, and we all make mistakes. But putting private matters into the public eye doesn't help anyone. It only invites outsiders into sacred space. I propose we have a family Zoom to talk things out. Rachel, we love you, and we're here when you're ready to come home with love, not accusations." Warmly? Mom. I didn't even have to read between the lines. It was all there. "You're the problem. We don't want the truth, we want the appearance of resolution. Come back quietly, and maybe we'll pretend this never happened." I stared at the blinking cursor. Then I hit reply all. And I wrote, "Hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation, but I won't be joining the Zoom. My story is not a private matter. It's a lived experience, and I have every right to tell it. The fact that so many of you are more upset about the telling than the actual events says a lot. I wish you all well, but I'm not shrinking myself anymore to make anyone comfortable. Sincerely, Rachel." I hit send. Then I closed my laptop and cried. Not from regret, but from release. Because that was the first time in my life I had ever chosen myself so publicly. And it felt terrifying. And thrilling. And real. 3 days later, a cousin I barely knew tagged me in a Facebook comment under an article about toxic oversharing. The comment said, "This generation is so obsessed with playing the victim. Imagine writing an entire book just to bash your family. Yikes." No name, but it didn't have to. It was aimed straight at me. I didn't respond. I let it sit there like a fire that burned itself out in its own pettiness. Because the more public I became, the more obvious it was who was actually uncomfortable with truth. And it wasn't me. Then came the local newspaper interview. They asked if I wanted to share my story as a feature. Not just the book, but the journey. The emotional arc. The family patterns. The healing. I said yes. The article went viral. And with it came messages from women all over the country. I read your story and sobbed. It felt like someone finally put my childhood into words. Thank you for showing me it's okay to set boundaries with people who share your DNA. I thought I was the only one who grew up feeling like a ghost in their own family. I read each one with trembling hands. Because this was the real impact. Not whether my mom liked it. Not whether my dad was embarrassed. But whether someone else out there, sitting in their apartment at 2 a.m. questioning their worth, felt a little less alone. Melanie texted me again after the article dropped. "Wow, this is really what you want your legacy to be? Wounded woman writes a revenge book?" This time I didn't answer. Because by now I understood. People will call your healing revenge when it inconveniences the version of you they're comfortable with. Especially when your silence was useful to them. The day of the book launch came. I was in a small bookstore in Denver, surrounded by string lights and paperbacks and strangers who had become sisters through the page. The room was packed. Not with family. Not with childhood friends. But with truth tellers. With survivors. With women who had walked through fire and were still brushing the ashes from their hair. When I stood behind the podium, I looked out at them and said, "Some people say telling your story is betrayal, but I think betrayal is staying silent about pain that shaped you just to protect those who caused it." And they clapped. They stood. And I finally knew. I had made it out. Not just from the house I grew up in, but from the version of myself that never got to speak. 2 weeks after the launch, I got another letter from my mother. Typed this time. Formal. "Rachel, I read the book. Parts of it were painful. Some I disagree with. But I recognize that you needed to say these things. I don't agree with your portrayal of me, but I can't deny that you feel the way you feel. I hope someday we can talk. Mom." I folded it neatly. Placed it in a box with the others. Maybe we will talk someday. Maybe we won't. But for now, I'm done asking for permission to exist. It's strange how reclaiming your story doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like breathing. A kind of breath you didn't even know you were holding your whole life. Not because someone told you to it, because somewhere along the line, you started believing that your silence was safer than your truth. I didn't change overnight. There was no single morning I woke up and declared, "I am healed now." But there were signs. Small ones at first. I stopped apologizing in emails. You know the kind. "Sorry for the delay. Sorry to bother you. Sorry if this is a stupid question." I replaced them with, "Thanks for your patience. I have a question. Here's what I need." It felt radical. And then I changed the name on my website. Not legally, just publicly. Instead of Rachel M. or RM Moore, the safe, professional, invisible initials, I started using my full name. Rachel Moore. The name that had been ignored on family cards. Misspelled on invitations. Omitted from photo slideshows. It was mine now. And I wasn't hiding it anymore. People started asking me to speak. Women's groups, book clubs, even a local college. Can you talk about toxic families? Can you talk about boundaries? Can you talk about how you healed? I didn't feel like an expert, not even close. But I showed up anyway. Because I knew what it felt like to sit in those chairs, wondering if your memories were valid, if your pain had a place, if your story was too small or too ugly or too inconvenient to be worth sharing. And I made a promise to myself. If even one woman walks out of this room feeling less alone, I will have done something that matters. Not long after, I was invited to appear on a podcast hosted by a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma. We talked for an hour about emotional neglect, favoritism, gaslighting, and healing that doesn't look pretty but works. Toward the end, she asked, "What would you say to someone who's just beginning this journey?" I took a breath. Then I said, "I'd tell her you're not crazy. You're not too sensitive. You didn't make it up. They just don't want you to remember it clearly because then they'd have to admit it happened." That quote went viral. And with it came another flood of messages. Women who hadn't spoken to their mothers in years. Women who still got knots in their stomach when the phone rang. Women who were told their whole lives to just let it go. They wrote, "I needed this more than I knew. You're telling my story. I'm not invisible anymore." And every time I read those words, I remembered the version of myself who once sat in the back seat of the family minivan, staring out the window while everyone else sang along to the radio, forgotten, ignored, pretending she didn't care. That girl was now someone's lifeline. One day, while walking through a bookstore in Boulder, I saw it. My book. Front-facing. A staff pick sticker on the cover. I stopped in my tracks. Not because I didn't believe it was there, but because I finally did. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the title. The Missing Sister, a memoir of being erased and finding my way back to myself. There, on the back cover, was my face. My name. My story. All the things they once told me were too much, or not true, or better left unsaid, bound in pages, shelved between bestsellers, waiting for the next woman who needed to feel seen. But power doesn't always come from book deals or magazine spreads. Sometimes it comes quietly. Like the day I changed my phone background from a photo of my family to a picture I took alone on a mountain trail in Estes Park. It was just me. Smiling. No one else in the frame. Or the time I said no to Thanksgiving. I didn't make up an excuse. Didn't offer to drop by for dessert. I just said, "No, I won't be attending this year." And when my mother replied, "Well, that's disappointing," I didn't shrink. I said, "I'm sure it is." Because that's the thing about quiet power. It doesn't need to be loud to be final. It's not about slamming dorsets, about choosing which ones you never walk through again. It's not about screaming matches, it's about holding your own silence like armor. It's not about revenge, it's about reclamation. And I was reclaiming everything. My voice. My memories. My worth. But the biggest shift? I stopped trying to fix the relationship. I stopped fantasizing about the phone call where my mother cried and apologized. Or the dinner where Melanie said she finally saw me. I stopped needing the people who broke me to be the ones who healed me. Because I learned, sometimes closure isn't something you get from them. It's something you give yourself. And that's the kind of power that no one can take back. I never intended to get back at them. This wasn't a scheme, it wasn't a plot, it was a process, a quiet, calculated reclamation of the life I should have always had. But when people are used to you shrinking, even your healing looks like an attack. So when I started to rise, they assumed it was personal. When in truth, it was finally just about me. The first ripple came when I got the offer to keynote a women's empowerment conference in Boston. Yes, Boston. The same city where I spent 2 decades being invisible at every family dinner, graduation party, and holiday brunch. The irony wasn't lost on me. The theme of the conference? Rewrite the narrative. God, if that wasn't divine timing, I don't know what was. I was slated to speak right before a best-selling author I had admired for years. The organizers told me they chose me because they wanted someone real, someone who knew what it meant to rebuild a life from silence. I said yes, of course. But not just because of the platform. Because I had a plan. A quiet one. But powerful. I booked a ticket for an extra 2 days in Boston. And before I left Denver, I made a list. Names. Not people I wanted to confront, but people I wanted to release. My mother. My father. Melanie. Aunt Lisa. The family friends who pretended not to see. The neighbors who played along. The teacher who told me, "You're just not a natural leader like your sister." It wasn't about vengeance. It was about intention. About finally closing the loop, not with drama but with clarity. The night before my flight, I printed photos. Old ones. Me as a child, smiling on a swing. Me holding a ribbon at a school competition no one attended. Me and Melanie before everything fractured, before the hierarchy took hold. I placed them in an envelope. At the top, I wrote in thick black ink, "For the girl they never saw." Then I packed it in my suitcase. Boston felt different this time. Less suffocating. More neutral. I stayed in a boutique hotel downtown. My room had a window that overlooked the skyline, same one I used to look at as a teenager and wonder what it felt like to belong. Now I knew. It feels like not needing anyone else to say you do. The conference was electric. Hundreds of women. Dozens of speakers. But my moment was Saturday afternoon. Main stage. Spotlights. A mic that wrapped behind my ear. I stood there, palms only slightly sweating, and looked out at a sea of women who had all been silenced in some way. And I told them my story. Not as a sob story. Not as a revenge plot. But as a testimony. Of survival. Of clarity. Of choosing yourself even if it means being misunderstood. Especially then. After the standing ovation, after the hugs and book signings and thank yous, I went back to my hotel. And I opened that envelope. I laid the pictures out on the bedspread. One by one. Then I walked to the rooftop of the hotel just before sunset. It was windy, golden light pouring across the skyline, the kind of light that made everything look like it was glowing from within. And I let them go, one by one. I watched the wind take each photo, each memory, each fragment of a girl who had tried so hard to be good, to be quiet, to be worthy. And I whispered, "You were always enough. They just weren't capable of seeing you." The next day, I met Jenny for coffee. She hugged me tight and said, "I read your speech online. They're still buzzing about it. You did it, Rachel." I smiled. "No, we did." She nodded, eyes wet. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I stirred my coffee slowly. "Maybe, but I don't need them to anymore." And I meant it. A week later, I got an email from a major podcast network. They wanted to option my story for a limited audio docuseries, something raw, something bold. They wanted to explore generational trauma, family hierarchy, and the cultural silence around emotional neglect. And they wanted me to narrate it. I signed the deal with a calm heart. Because this wasn't just about them anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been told to stop exaggerating, get over it, or remember the good times. This was for the forgotten daughters. That same month, I started a mentorship program. Small, intimate groups. Virtual circles of women who had lived through favoritism, gaslighting, and emotional erasure. We met weekly, we shared stories, we cried, we laughed. And I watched week after week as these women stepped into the light. One said, "I just told my mother I need space. For the first time ever." Another said, "I finally stopped chasing my sister's approval. I feel free." And another quietly said, "You made me feel real again." I didn't respond right away. I was too full. Of gratitude, of purpose, of the quiet knowing that this was what it had all led to. I never confronted my parents in some dramatic scene. I never demanded they admit what they did. Because the truth is, they already knew. That's why they got so defensive. That's why they scrambled to contain me. Because deep down, they knew I was telling the truth. And they also knew they couldn't stop me anymore. I always thought the climax of my story would be loud. You know, movie scene loud. Slam doors. Tears. Shouting matches in echoing foyers. Someone grabbing my arm and whispering, "You went too far." But when the time finally came, when the moment that felt like the confrontation arrived, it wasn't loud at all. It was just still. And finally, mine. It happened in a garden. A literal garden. My parents had invited me to lunch. Out of the blue. A carefully worded email from my mother. It would mean a lot if we could sit down, not to fight, just to talk. No subject line. No emojis. I almost deleted it. But something told me this is the final page. Not a chapter. Not a cliffhanger. The page where you decide who you are without them. So I agreed. One condition: public place, neutral ground. They chose a little cafe with outdoor seating, ivy-covered trellises, brick patio, soft music playing from hidden speakers. I arrived 5 minutes early, not out of eagerness, out of power. I wanted to be sitting when they walked in. My father showed up first. Pressed button down, still wore that faint cologne that used to mean comfort and now made my stomach tighten. Then my mother. Blazer, pearl earrings, the expression of someone preparing for a business negotiation, not a reckoning. Rachel, she said, cool, polite. Hi, I said, warm but firm. We sat. There was small talk at first. Work. Weather. My mother commented on the lemon tree by the gate. Then came the pause. The shift. My dad cleared his throat. We read the book, he said. My mother stared at the table. Not at me. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, he continued. Some of it felt harsh. I nodded. It wasn't written to comfort anyone. A long silence. Then my mom spoke, finally looking at me. Do you really believe we were that bad? My throat tightened, but I didn't flinch. I believe what happened shaped me. I believe I was hurt, over and over, in ways that nobody acknowledged, and I believe I have every right to tell that truth. Her eyes were glassy, but not from regret, from resistance. She wanted to argue, defend, reframe. But I didn't give her the space. I kept going. You don't have to agree. You don't even have to understand. But you don't get to rewrite my story. My dad leaned back, exhaled. We made mistakes, but we were trying. I tilted my head. Intent doesn't erase impact. More silence. That's when I realized. This wasn't about convincing them. It wasn't about getting them to say, you were right. It was about saying it out loud for me. I was confronting my own silence, not their approval. After a pause, I said, I'm not here to rehash everything. My mother looked confused. Then why are you here? I smiled, gently. To let you know I'm okay. She blinked. That's it? That's everything. They both looked a little lost after that, like they'd prepared for a different battle. But the war was already over. Because I wasn't here to fight. I was here to release. I wasn't their forgotten daughter anymore. I was a woman who had written her own story. And nothing they said or didn't say could change that. We paid separately. They walked me to the sidewalk. An awkward hug, a handshake. No promises to call. No forced plans for Christmas. Just a nod. A flicker of understanding, not of what they did, but of who I now was. Someone they no longer controlled. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Because I didn't need to. There was no longer a version of me waiting in that garden. No child hoping they'd chase after her. No teenager rehearsing a monologue they'd never listened to. Just me. Whole. Quiet. Unapologetic. When I got back to Denver, I went straight to my favorite trail. Climbed until my legs burned. Stood at the summit, wind whipping my jacket, heart steady. And I said out loud, I forgive you. I release you. But I will never ever forget myself again. And that? That was the confrontation. Not a battle. Not a breakdown. But a boundary. One they couldn't cross again. Because this time, I saw myself. And I wasn't going anywhere. There's this moment after the storm has passed, after the ground stops shaking, after the doors you once banged on so desperately remain closed, that you suddenly realize you're free. Not because they forgave you. Not because they finally understood. But because you stopped needing them to. That moment doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't play music. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. Quiet. Clear. Like breath in your lungs after years of holding it. It's been 8 months since the book came out. In that time, I've been called brave. And bitter. Empowering. And ungrateful. Healing. And dramatic. It depends on who's talking. But for the first time in my life, I don't care who's talking. Because I know who I am now. I live in a small townhouse in Denver with creaky stairs and a window that catches the morning sun just right. I write every day. Sometimes for money, sometimes for joy. I host virtual workshops on boundaries, story reclamation, and healing family trauma. Not because I have all the answers, but because I know how to ask the questions that set you free. I've made friends with women I never would have met if I hadn't told the truth. Women who carry the same quiet grief I once did. Women who are learning, like I did, that your worth is not up for family debate. Some nights, I still hear echoes. A line from my mother. A cutting remark from Melanie. A memory of trying to shrink myself to fit in their frame. But now I don't stuff those echoes down. I listen. Then I say back softly, I'm not that girl anymore. And the echo fades. A few months ago, I visited a high school creative writing class as a guest speaker. They were reading memoirs and asked if I'd come talk about mine. I stood in front of those students, all elbows and oversized hoodies and half eye contact, and told them the truth. You are allowed to tell your story, even if it makes people uncomfortable. You are allowed to say that hurt me, even if someone else swears it didn't happen that way. You are allowed to become someone your family doesn't recognize. And you are allowed to live your life without their permission. A girl in the front row, freckles, nervous fingers raised her hand. What if they never say sorry? I smiled. You say it to yourself. I have a ritual now. Every Sunday morning, I go to a little diner near my house. Booth by the window, I bring my journal. I order coffee, eggs, and toast with too much butter. And I write one letter. To the girl I used to be. Sometimes I write, I'm proud of you. You deserve so much better. You were never too much. You were always worth the seat at the table. I never send them, of course. But every letter feels like a stitch. Weaving myself whole again. Do I miss my family? Sometimes. The idea of them. The way I imagined they could be. The way I hoped they might someday see me. But I don't ache for them anymore. Because I finally gave myself what I spent my whole life begging for. Love. Respect. Safety. Voice. And that is enough. They still gather without me. Holidays. Birthdays. Matching outfits in front of fireplaces. Sometimes people send me the photos. I don't ask for them. And when I see them now, I feel nothing. No jealousy. No rage. Just distance. And peace. Because I'm not the missing sister anymore. I'm the liberated one. A reader once emailed me and said, You didn't just tell your story. You gave us permission to tell ours. And maybe that's the legacy I want. Not revenge. Not a dramatic final word. But a beginning. For every woman who was erased in her own family photos. For every girl who was told to get over it. For every quiet daughter who finally stopped whispering. So if you're reading this or hearing this and you recognize yourself in any part of my story, know this. You are not broken. You are not crazy. You are not unworthy. You were just taught to believe that love was something you had to earn by being small, but you were never meant to be small. You were meant to rise. And me? I'm still rising. Every time I tell the truth. Every time I write a sentence that makes someone feel seen. Every time I say no and mean it. Every time I choose the woman I want to be over the girl they trained me to be. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the chapter where I finally put down the pen they kept trying to rip from my hands and started writing in my own name.